Okay, I'm just going to get started. Welcome, I'm Gail Ringwalt, and today we're going to talk about including students in the IEP process before high school. I'm hoping by the end of this session, you'll have some ideas about how to include students from elementary all the way through high school, but how to get them started sooner and try to help the whole process. And I know we are used to having students in that transition age, but hopefully this gives you some ideas about how to make this process work for even elementary students. There we go. Okay, so while we're going through this, kind of be thinking what your action plan would be. Who, what, when, and how that you could start thinking about having students participate. You might want to start small. You might want to start in a certain grade. You might want to start with certain kinds of kids, but just that idea of trying to think through ideas that you might have to include kids. At the end, we'll kind of do a little chat and see any ideas you came up with, because I'm sure it will get you thinking. So first I'm going to show you this little video.
To read more in school and stay on track of class and paying attention more.
Self-determination means to me that I can let my teachers know what I need and that I have autism and ADHD. And that when I'm mad, I can let them know that I need a quiet space so I can cool down and just have a little alone time, because it makes me feel a lot better, because I can think about what I can't do and what is not appropriate and what that is appropriate to do.
Self-determination means asking for help when you need help. Self-determination means that I take care of my own hearing aids and I test them every day at Miss Temple's room in a book, and I go to the office and check them. I throw the batteries away and put new ones in, and it's really important so I can take care of them real good. Self-determination means to me raising my hand and asking to go to the resource room. Self-determination means to me when I ask my mom and teacher if I can stay for tutoring, and when I come down to the resource room for help and quiet. Self-determination means me going to my IEP meetings, listening to all the good things about what my mom, Miss Gray, and my teacher has to say about me. And my goals are to get out of speech by May, and for me to get out of speech, I have to practice my oral words. Self-determined means I have trouble listening. I help myself. I ask my friends for help. I raise my hand. I ask if I can go down to the resource room. Self-determination means to me setting goals for myself, like focusing in school, listening to my teacher, and listening to my mom. If I reach these goals, I reward myself by giving myself candy or extra iPod or TV time. I want to make good grades and pass. I want to graduate and have a career. I also want to make my parents proud of me too.
Okay, so all kids know if they have an IEP, kids know with disabilities that they're different maybe, and that they have struggles that other kids don't have. But as you can see from the video, even very small kids, even if they can't say self-determination, they still understand what it is, and they still can understand their goals and know what they have to work on and how to help themselves, and what kind of accommodations that they need. And all of those kids were mostly were confident and at least understood what they needed to do. It gives kids, like, often when we are doing IEPs and I go to facilitated meetings, we are, and when I did IEPs myself, we are doing something to the kids. We are setting their goals. We are setting their rewards and their punishments. And sometimes they don't even know what it is that they're working on. We know because we've determined that. So if we give kids some ownership in it, we're going to see better outcomes because they have ownership in it. As we know, self-determination is the ability to help direct your own life. And that's what IEP should do. Should help kids understand, hey, this may be a struggle for you now. How are we going to work on it? What can we do to help you? Kids, they know what they'll work for. They know if they know what they're working on, they can help keep track of their progress or ways they might need a little more help. And so, yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that little video. Okay, now in an elementary meeting, one thing you have to talk about is, what does a student know about their disability? This is something that I would talk to a parent about first, because there are parents that you will have that do not want their child to know that they have a disability. I know that sounds kind of different, but some just don't. I mean, most kids know that they're different somehow, but there are parents that don't want their student to know they have a disability. There are students that won't be able to understand what their disability is, but those that can, and those who have parents that allow, they should know something about what it means to have a vision impairment, what it means to have a specific learning disability, what it means, what if they're other health impaired, what their other health impairment is. Those are important things for a student to understand. They should have knowledge of what an IEP is. I have been in conferences with high school kids that didn't know they had goals, that didn't know what an IEP was. But depending on the level of the kid, even elementary students can understand that they have certain goals. Everybody has goals in the class, and they maybe need some help on specific activities, and ask them what they think those are. So they should have a knowledge of what is in an IEP. Information as simple as those basic things that we talk about in an IEP, which would be, where are they now? What are their present levels? What can they do right now? And what they can't do right now. And what kind of goals are we going to have? What is the most troublesome thing? What is the hardest thing for them to do? We're going to still teach things that are difficult. We don't just teach goals. And then they need to know how that's going to be measured. You can even make a learning activity, make a graph of progress on goals. Have the student help you progress monitor goals. And then who's going to help them with different things, right? And then also, it's the idea of dependence or independence. Parents need to focus on this, kids need to focus on this. We ask those questions during transition. What do you want to be when you grow up? Where do you want to live? Where do you want to work? Are you going to live by yourself? Do you want to live at home? Those kinds of questions. You can ask small children. Every little kid can tell you what they want to be when they grow up, and to try to help them understand what they have to do to become independent. And I'll just put in here that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and I will answer them as I go. So So student input versus student participation, those are two different things. And student participation is something that, as you'll see in a minute, is what an older child might do, a middle school and high school child. An elementary child student is going to have inputs. And I'll give you some examples as we go through about what kind of input they can have. So those are two different ideas. When I say that kids need to be involved in their IEPs, I don't mean that a kindergartner needs to go and sit through a 2-hour-long IEP meeting. But there are things that they can do to have input into that meeting. A student that's in high school maybe will sit and participate in the meeting. They are a required person at the meeting. Again, parents can opt for students not to be involved until they're 18. And again, there's that focus on dependence or independence. This is really hard, and some parents struggle. I know when my son was little, I thought, oh gosh, how will he ever be able to go away from home? And then all of a sudden, when they're in high school, sometimes you're thinking, okay, it's time. It's time for you to start to be independent. So kind of thinking through those things about how you become independent and what that looks like. So this was just sort of a fun fact that I found about who talks. So we know that the people that participate are family, parent, grandparent, a special educator, TOR usually, general educator, any service providers, or sometimes paras come, an administrator is the PAR, and the student. But then you look at who talks. We all know teachers can talk, but the special educator is the one that does the most talking, and the student does the least amount of talking. So part of this is because they're older, as kids get older, and then all of a sudden they have to go, think about how terrifying that would be. All of a sudden you're like, okay, you're in the most awkward time of your life in middle school, and you have to go sit with all these adults. And it's like, oh, what do I say? Sometimes kids don't want to talk. So some things we have to teach kids how to do, because it's a little intimidating to go in with all these adults that are going to talk about you and trying to help you. And sometimes it's hard. One of the positive things I think about this whole process of having kids involved in their IEP sooner is the idea that sometimes it's hard for middle school kids to advocate, to talk about themselves, and do it politely around adults. They get defensive, they get rude, but if kids practice it from when they're younger, it's much easier to advocate for themselves. It's much easier to speak to a group of adults politely and to advocate for themselves. So that's another reason why, hopefully, if kids are starting at a younger age, the 3% will become a higher number. And I know it's hard. I did not like speech. I didn't want to talk in front of people. I hated speech class. But at my son's school, from kindergarten, kids had to get up and speak in front of their peers on all sorts of things. Assignments, a lot of times they had to speak in front of their peers. So my son doesn't have any fear of public speaking. So I think that if we get kids involved younger, we'll have more conversations. Because when you look at this list, we're writing an IEP to help the student, and yet they're not participating 3% of the time. So, okay, so how do we start? How do we get younger children involved? So here's my continuum. And it's everything from a student leading and directing all aspects of the process, which would be probably an older student, high school student. And on the other end of the continuum is that the IEP takes place without the student present. So that doesn't mean, just because they aren't present does not mean they cannot be involved. And then you see there's all different things. It's kind of like our services, right? There's a continuum of placement and services. There also is a continuum of students being involved in their IEPs. And you wouldn't want to take a kid and have them be leading it all and they're in 4th grade. Now, maybe they can. Some kids probably could, but there has to be a learning process and you have to work through it in order to get to that point. But really more high school kids should be running their IEPs. And the ones that I've been involved in, some kids are very articulate, know what they're good at, and speak very well for themselves. Again, you have to build on their capacity. You have to look at each child, again, like an IEP, it has to be individualized. Who can do what, when, where, how much, what parents will allow it to work. I know that sometimes parents don't want their child to come to the IEP when they're older because they say there's too much negative stuff and they don't want their child to hear it. So that would be a learning curve to try to, I mean, I always took that as, why is it a negative thing? I mean, no child is perfect. Children with emotional disabilities struggle. So yes, they may have a lot of issues, but how can we make it a more positive thing for both student and parent? So I think that sometimes we have to think about that and why kids are excluded from their IEP meetings. Because again, it's about them. So I have found that when you're trying to do behavior plans and things, when a parent or a teacher is talking about what kids work for, I have watched students that were at the meeting sit there shaking their head like, no, I am not working for that. And they're just setting it all up. Because sometimes, as we all know, what works for a little while, as far as rewards and punishments, stops working. So we need that input from students, find out what they like and don't like. And I think that if you build a kid's capacity in elementary school, it will help in those high school transition type of conferences because they'll understand the process. It won't be something you can teach the process slowly instead of sitting down before that very first conference where a student is attending and saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. Then you just start telling them all this stuff and it's pretty soon it's whoosh right over their heads. It's too much information. But if you slowly get students involved and you slowly acclimate them to what happens in the meeting, then they would better be able to advocate for themselves and have a more positive, kind of collaborative feeling about it. See if anybody's had any questions. Okay, so there are 3 times where you can have students involved: before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And I would say for elementary kids, the focus would be before the meeting and after the meeting, as opposed to that transition place where they're actually going to the meeting at first. Again, I would be sure that a parent is okay with the student knowing about their disability. And maybe making a rubric for the kids so they know, so you can have ideas about what they're going to do, when you're going to tell them what. And again, if parents say no, they don't want their child to know, you need to say okay, and make sure they understand that when a student is 18, unless they're not capable and the parent has them declared so, they will be in charge. So of the everything. And I have seen kids say, I don't want any services. And that's really hard because they may need them, but all of a sudden they're in charge. So if parents say no, you got to kind of help the parents get there. It might take you several years. They may never get there, but that is a discussion. You can't just do this without that parent input. So what can you do before the meeting? You can, these are ideas that I've come up with. If you think of more, I'm going to ask you in a minute if you can come up with some. We'll put them in the chat. But here are my ideas. You could have an IEP scavenger hunt. You could show them their IEP, show them where their goals are, what their present levels are, where it tells who's going to help them. You could just go through the paperwork itself to say, here it is. Can you find? You could talk about a life course trajectory. What do you want to be when you grow up? You want to get up to here? What might you have to do to get there? Right? If you want to be a nurse, what do you have to do to be a nurse? If you want to be a firefighter, what do you have to do to be a firefighter? If you want to be a cameraman behind the NBA basketball games, what do you have to do? Those kinds of things. A one-pager, I'll show you an example further on a website, but a one-pager would just be, what are my strengths? Ask a kid, what are your strengths? What do you do really well? What do you do well at school? What do you do well at home? These are things that you can then take to the IEP. As a teacher, you can say, hey, here is what Johnny's strengths are. We're going to put him in. This is what he says his strengths are. And then when you go back, you can do the scavenger hunt. Well, can you find where we put the information you gave me in? Maybe you put also what things are hard for you. And you have the student either write them or draw or have someone scribe for them to put those things down on paper that you can take to the IEP meeting. A goal plan. Maybe you have kids say, well, what would you like your goal to be? What is hard for you? What do you think? How far do you think you can get? Have them be thinking about that. I'll show you an example of an iMovie in a little bit. We all have iPhones, so it's kind of fun. Name tags. You can have little kids. Little kids, if you know who's coming, if grandma's coming, and maybe a little sister or brother is coming, mom, dad, you can have them make name cards so that you can put them at the table and say, hey, Sarah made these name tags for everybody so everybody knows where to sit because she knows that you're coming to participate in her case conference. You can have a student write an invitation to their parent that says, hey, I'm so glad you're coming to my case conference, right? The teacher will tell you all about my strengths and what I need help on. All right, or they can help you set up the room. Excuse me. And maybe they can set it up and put out the name tags on the table where they want everyone to sit. Those are just some things that I came up with as far as ways before the meeting to help kids participate without actually being there, just to get them used to the idea of, hey, this is the day they're having the meeting about me. And when the teacher gets back, she's going to tell me, or mom's going to tell me when I get home what they talked about and what I can do to help. All right, so those are just some ideas. So I'm going to say, if you have any other ideas, if you could put them in the chat, if any come to your mind of ways that maybe you could include elementary age students or middle school students in their IEPs before the meeting. This is not going to the meeting. This is someone maybe taking the information to the meeting, but it's something that has to be done first. And I will say that some of these activities, for instance, the one pager, or the invitations or the name tags. Those are all things that can be incorporated into things that you would normally do in class. Maybe if you're having like the one pager about strengths, if you're writing sentences, or if you have certain vocabulary words you're using, you could have kids, I mean, you could have every kid do this. What are your strengths? You could have your whole class do it. What are the things that you do best? What are the things that you struggle with? If you have like kindergartners and they're learning to write names, you can have that, or letters. Even if you wrote the name and they copied it, so you can incorporate some of these things into activities that you would already be doing in your class. So you don't have to add anything to it. Oh, good one. An about me activity. Sure. And kindergarten teachers are great at that. All about me and doing different activities. Since it is an IEP, normally is once a year, right? So if you did things about yourself, about the kid, all about me, you might have, the teacher might have a whole multiple types of information to bring to the meeting that they can say, okay, before we start, let me tell you about Susan. So, ooh, I like that one, about me. Anybody have another one? Okay, if you think of something, just stick it in there. Stick it in the chat. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let me show you the iMovie example. Okay, so that's just a short iMovie. We all have those things. And you can have the child pick the music. Most teachers nowadays take pictures or videos throughout the year. So you could incorporate those into a short, like you can see, like 1 minute that you could show before the case conference and say, hey, Jack wanted me to show everybody this. It's a positive way to start the meeting. So yeah, so the iMovie is something that pretty much everybody has access to, and it makes it easy to kind of highlight positive things about a student, because even students that struggle certain times always have positive things that they've done throughout the year. And again, it doesn't take but a few minutes, and you can have the student pick whatever kind of music they want, maybe pick the different activities, put them in there, and you're done. It's just a great way to have kids involved when they don't actually have to be at the conference. It helps to get them involved in what's happening. Whoops. No, sorry about that. Okay, so I have a couple other on this I'm Determined website. They have, not that you couldn't find your own or create your own, but let's see. They have like different, they have examples of one pagers, strengths, concern, my needs. They have a day planner, a good day, a goal. What's my goal going to be? So as you can see, you can download them. They're fillable PDFs that you can type right on. So this website is so full of information. It could take us like 2 hours just to go through all the information. But just so you know, it has a more elementary look to it, because these blanks are big enough kids could draw information in it to take. So there's that one. And let's see. Oops. Now where are you? Okay, then there's life courses, and life courses is more of a for older kids. Sorry, something happened. There we are. So let's see if I can get it to work. Or not. Okay, here it is. And again, they also have so many resources, but some of them are those trajectory, person-centered. Well, this one doesn't seem to be working quite so well, but it's in there, and I will, you can look at it. Let's see. Okay, so see, they have these kind of trajectory of life, like you're starting here, where do you want to be? What is it going to take to get you there? And again, this website has a ton of stuff on it. It will take you a while to go through it all just to see what there is available. So when you are in the meeting, kids can do introductions. Kids can highlight their accomplishments. Now, I will say sometimes, like according to the continuum, maybe you have the student come and introduce everybody, talk about their strengths, talk about the things that they have done positively during the year, what they've accomplished. Maybe they can share their one pager or share where they want to go, and then maybe they leave. Maybe as time goes on, they stay for their goals, or maybe they stay for their accommodations and then they go. Maybe they stay for the whole thing. But just because they're going to start to come to the meeting doesn't mean they have to stay for the whole meeting. And those are things you could talk out with the kid and prepare them. Who's going to be there? You know, the kid may know who's coming from mom and dad, and maybe a baby sister or grandma, or maybe the person that helps mom being the advocate. And they will know, you will tell them who the school people are so that the kid will know. You can have them practice. I mean, hey, it's always good to practice, right? Kids always can stand up, and every kid should be able to stand up and say, hey, this is what I did this week I'm so proud of myself. We all have elementary teachers are excellent. Even middle school and high school are saying, this is what's great. Look at all my superstars up there on the wall, and finding a way to get everybody up on the wall. So here are some of the ways that students can start to participate in their meetings. Obviously, as they get older, they should stay longer and they should participate in more of it. But again, they need to know what is coming. They need to understand the different things that are talked about. A high school student needs to know their accommodations. They need to know the different parts of the IEP so that they know what to expect when it's coming. And even if they have to prep for it, so that they don't forget what they want when they get nervous with all those adults around, so that they have a way to share. Accommodations is another place where it's really good to have student input, because there are accommodations that we put in place, and I'm all for, excuse me, putting as much as possible in place when kids are smaller, especially for the tests, when they have to do standardized tests. But I think it behooves teachers to be really paying attention to what kids use and don't use. If a kid never uses extra time, maybe you take that out. If then they say, you know what, I wish I had more time, you can put it back in. But students should be able to know their accommodations. Going back to my point from earlier, we need to teach students how to advocate for themselves politely. Which, when you get into that middle school and high school age, sometimes it's harder to learn how to, because there's often been a lot of rudeness. It's hard to say, this is the things I need. So it's a way to learn to talk to adults to say, this is what I need. Because when you go to college, or if you go to a business, or you go to a vocational school, you need to know what to say. You need to be able to say, I don't see very well, I need to stand in the front. Or I get easily distracted, I need to sit as close as I can to the person talking so I'm not distracted. I need extra time on tests, or I need to use voice to text, and I need to have books on tape. So they need to know what those are. For behaviors, kids really need to be involved, so that a behavior plan is something that they will agree to, and that they understand what all the different parts are. So, any other ways you have of being included in the meeting, so that they don't just sit there and talk 3% of the time? Okay, so we have inventory before, you could do with them before to see what they know is available. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good, Giovanna. Excellent idea. They can share their present levels. Absolutely. They could share their present levels of where they are. And especially if, because they have been involved and because they know what their goals are, they can say, this is what I'm doing now. Absolutely. That's a great one. Sharing their present levels. And another good one pointed out, Jessica, is the idea of what kind of accommodations are available. What is available, and maybe you let kids try stuff and explain to them the things that are available, so that they have a better idea of what they can choose from. And some things are different, right? Sometimes you need extra time on a test because you're nervous, or maybe you don't need any extra time on a test, but if you have a project due, that might take you longer, so you kind of wish you had some extra time. So sometimes explaining that it can be different, or sometimes you want to take a test all by yourself if it's a standardized test, but when you're just taking a math test at the end of the math unit, you could just do it in class with everybody else. So those are the kinds of things you can have discussions with kids about, so that you can put them in. Absolutely, kids can say what is working and not working. And absolutely, and I will say, one problem with that is that sometimes we don't listen. I'm as guilty as everybody else. If a kid says it's not working, then you say, well, what would work? Right? Not, of course it is. Well, if you did it right, or some other comment that we have. But if we're truly listening to them, and if they're collaborating, that's great. Sharing their present levels, working, absolutely. I will say, the one thing they can't do is they can tell you they don't want to work with a certain teacher, but just like parents, that isn't an option to necessarily choose from. But they can say things that, I mean, there are a lot of paras that are one-on-one with kids, and maybe middle school and high school kids, that kind of digs into your social time because nobody wants an adult right with you all the time. So those kinds of things, what works, what doesn't. What worked in elementary school might not work in middle school. Okay. So, okay, then there is the debrief. So you can have exit surveys for elementary kids, secondary, teachers, parents, a thank you note. You can have kids write a thank you note that says, thank you for coming to my case conference. Or maybe give them a little certificate at the beginning, participated in their, or had input into their first IEP meeting. Maybe the first time they go and explain their present levels, you give them a certificate that great job. You participated in your first IEP meeting. And again, a thank you note can be part of a lesson plan that were a part of a class. Everybody has to write. Maybe you make it a thank you note. And just an exit survey of kids. Okay, what part did you like? What part did you understand? Which part made you nervous? Which part do you want to be included in next? Those kinds of questions. And the same way with secondary students, it's kind of like, I know even when I used to do the case conferences when I was a principal, every once in a while I'd have like feedback, and the teachers and I, okay, can we do anything to make these better, more efficient, to have better outcomes? And so that just kind of input into the meeting itself and what could be better or not better. So, are there any questions? People got an idea? Do you have an idea of things that you could kind of put into place to maybe have kids more involved? Maybe you have a kid in mind that you think could do it. You could even have kids do, kids are great at the technology. Kids could do iMovies of each other. Of, even just talking what they did well, put some music to it. You'll have some videographers by the end of elementary school. So people have an idea of things that they could take back and maybe put into place. Any questions? Okay, for transition plans, you can always go and the website will be a little bit farther as far as the transition plans. But what I will say before I get there, and I'll show it to you, Giovanna, when I'll point it out when we get there. What I would say about transition plans is that to remember that when you do those different evaluations, just remember when you're writing, think of the different, like independent living, work, and school. Think about those different things. And when you're thinking about the transition plan, always say okay to, well, at least at the beginning, say okay to what the kids say. And then try to think out, because your goal for transition is supposed to be something that is unique to the kid, not something that everybody gets. So it shouldn't be going to talk to the counselor. So it's hard at the beginning because you will have kids that say they want to be an NBA basketball player. And we know probably they aren't. But I never discouraged kids because I would then think of activities that they could do to give them ideas of other things they could do. If that didn't work, we might do the math, right? How many NBA players are, how many elementary, middle, high school, college, NBA. But again, sometimes kids, you don't know what you don't know, but there are a ton of jobs that can have you be involved. So maybe you have them do an activity of what other jobs are there if I wanted to be involved with an NBA team, as far as trainers and even the guy behind the camera or referee, or there are all sorts of jobs. So try to steer them toward that. My best story about that is that I had a student that wanted to be a policeman, and he didn't like PE. He didn't like to do any physical activity. So we worked on what kind of questions he would ask when he called the police station to ask about what it took to be a policeman. And so my parent took him, he made the call, he came back and he goes, oh, no way. You have to be able to run like a mile and do all this physical labor. But the person that he talked to was amazing because they told him, well, maybe if you don't want to do that, but you could be a 911 operator or you could do this. So she gave him other ideas. So that's what I would say about transition plans. Just think about what the student wants to do or says they want to do, and then try to find something that has to do with that topic specific to them. Let's see. Well, okay, so Ashley, it can be tricky sometimes. But if you start early enough, kids know they struggle. Kids know they aren't the same. Kids know more than we give them credit for. So sometimes, you don't necessarily have to single out. Every single kid struggles in something and is good in something. So if the hardest conversation, I think, is with the parent, so that you can talk about the disability, if it requires that. The most times I have found where people didn't want their student to know is kids with autism and actually visually impaired kids, where I'm pretty sure the kids knew. But we tried to teach our little kids even what their vision impairment was and what that meant. For some disabilities, like I said, you can, if a kid is SLD and they struggle with reading, maybe another kid struggles with math. Maybe when you talk to all your kids individually about things, strengths and weaknesses, and that everybody has them, and some people need more help than others, and there we go. But again, sometimes you can do things like the one pager or the all about me. You do those things anyway in a class often, or asking the kids, let's talk about all our strengths at the beginning of the year. Then maybe halfway through the year, you say, hey, what have you learned so far? So if you do it as a class activity, it becomes a little less of a stigma. Does that help? Because it will take brave kids to it will take kids, like, it's hard to go into a meeting with a bunch of adults. It just is. But little kids are much more open than older kids. So if they're used to it, that will help. And lots of times we are doing things to keep track, or we have kids keep track of progress that they're making. We just need to be more specific about it with some kids, or say to some kids, hey, look how much better you did. We're going to take this to your meeting to show everybody how much progress you've made. Does that help? I hope. It is a hard question. But I think that, again, kids know that they have that they have problems. And if they know, I mean, that they need to work on something and that then they're getting better at it, then it helps. Because our whole goal is for the kids to be able to, regardless of their disability, to participate as much as they can in the general ed curriculum. And if you have a student that struggles with writing or reading, like, then if they have to use the voice to text, okay, truly everyone should know how to do voice to text. As a college professor, I've never taken a paper. Everything's turned in online. I know some of them use voice to text, but it's formatted. And so some of those accommodations that kids have, yes, they might need them, but other kids may use them, but somebody else might have to use them all the time. It's like a calculator. Some kids probably don't need to use a calculator because they have all those, they do really well at math. Other kids may need to use one all the time. So some of the things, as kids learn and as they meet their goals and as they participate more with their gen ed peers, it's easier. It's probably harder with the kids that are have more difficulties having them involved. Yeah, there are parents that just don't want their kids to know. And I find those the most difficult because I'm pretty sure the kids know. So I think it's just, and I understand because depending on why the student is disabled, it makes it, sometimes it's an emotional thing for the parents. And so, I mean, we all just want our kids to be normal, whatever that is. But yeah, so it's hard. Some kids aren't capable of understanding it, but those that are, I think you still always, maybe you don't have it as much in elementary, but you kind of bring it up. Often that idea of what do you want your kid to look like when they're done? Because at some point, K-12 is going to be gone, right? And so you have to keep having those conversations. And at 18, the kid gets to have a lot more say, and we need to have them understand as they go along. So there's opportunities, but I would say that in my 30 plus years of education, I've only had less than 10, probably 5 parents that just were really adamant. So I think that there's more that would agree than not. Oh yeah, that's another good idea. Digital portfolio or where kids can share their growth in a visual way. Absolutely. And anything that you can put together that, and again, some of these things I know you're realizing can be for every kid. You can have every kid making a portfolio of what they do in second grade, right? From beginning to end. This is what I did. This was my writing sample at the beginning of second grade. Oh my gosh, look at Christmas time. Look how much better I am. Kids love to look at that kind of stuff. You guys have great ideas. Great ideas. So here are the, if you want to register for more, or if you could go on and evaluate the session, that would be awesome. I'd appreciate that. And here's me, and I will send you this along with the recording so you could listen to it later. And then your question about, it's here, the Indiana, it's at IU, it's the Transition Center. And so if you go to their website, they have a whole bunch of things about transition. So many. That website is, it's INSTRC, just like those initials, .indiana.edu. So if you go there, they have a ton of stuff. These are the other, they're part of the Indiana Resource Network also, but anything transition, they're the go-to people. So they would have a lot of resources for you. So I hope that helps give you a little bit of, Giovanna, I hope that gives you a place to go. Oh, my contact slide. Yeah, absolutely. There's me. So if you have questions or you just want more information, I'd be happy to. And I like some of your ideas when I add it to some of my slides for future ideas of how to include kids before transition age in their IEPs. Does anybody have any other questions? Everybody have a plan? All right, well, I appreciate your time. If you could go in and evaluate, that would be awesome. I'll go back to that slide. There we are. And I will be sending out certificates, and yeah. And I hope everybody has a great day. Unless there's other questions. Okay, share with your friends. Everybody have a good day.